I'm going to be talking to Mark Nevitt, who's an associate professor of law at Emory Law in Atlanta, about the speeches that were given by President Donald Trump and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth at a meeting of generals and admirals on Tuesday. It's very controversial. Want to get his view on how this actually affects the military. So, welcome to the interview, Mark.
It's great to be here, Markham. Thank you.
Give me your take on the meeting in general, how important it is. Is this a nothing burger or is this plenty of burger?
Well, it's hard to say what the precise implications will be following the meeting. I will say that it is pretty extraordinary to bring all the U.S. military generals and admirals from all over the world to one place in D.C. for what the military calls essentially an all hands meeting to sort of get direction from the Secretary of Defense and then the President of the United States. So it's hard to say what the follow-on impacts will be. I think what Hegseth is trying to do and President Trump is trying to do is change the culture of the military, which is not done overnight. And so we will see how this plays out.
I interviewed Professor Kristen van de Wiesenbos from the Western School of Law in California the other day, and we were talking about constitutional guardrails and how the Trump administration was testing all of the guardrails it could. And we talked specifically about this, and her opinion was that this is Trump and Hegseth testing the constitutional guardrails around the military, deployment for domestic policing, that sort of thing. Would you agree or disagree?
So there's active litigation about the role of the military in policing, and that's unfolding right now in California as we speak. So I think she's correct in that there's active legal issues. There's both statutory claims, Markham, and constitutional claims. And so I agree that the president and Mr. Hegseth are certainly pushing the outer limits of how the military has historically been deployed, and that's playing itself out in federal court. The administration has had some wins. They've also had some losses in federal court. But I will say that the widespread use of the military, we're seeing in Portland, DC, Chicago, Memphis, Los Angeles, at this level is extraordinarily high and ahistorical, has not been consistent with how the U.S. military has been used in this country.
During his speech, Secretary of Defense Hegseth said that he wanted the U.S. military to return to a warrior ethos, end of the woke culture. And what do you make of that?
Hard to say. I mean, Secretary Hegseth wrote a book called The War on Warriors, and he believes that the military has been sort of captured by ideology and captured by wokeness, which is sort of a term that I think lacks meaning because it's so broad. And so I think at some level, the military's role is warfighting and national security. And so it's good to get back to basics at some level. But there also is just a lot of value in people feeling included and people feeling as though they are welcome in the military. The military has a recruitment and retention crisis happening right now in the U.S. military, and that applies to regardless of who you are, the color of your skin or your race or gender. And so, I think he's trying to change the culture in his vision that is laid out, frankly, in his book. He talked about his book in his speech yesterday. And so we'll sort of see how that culture changes. It takes a long time to change a military's culture.
Well, I gather it takes a long time to change a corporate culture, plenty of other types of culture. What do you make of the changes to the rules of engagement? That seemed to be flagged by other academics as being a bit of an eye-opener.
So the Hegseth has been very open, and I've written about this, about his sort of lack of, I don't want to say disdain, but maybe lack of deference to military judge advocate generals, military lawyers, who are the people who are providing key legal advice, to include legal advice on rules of engagement, which is how you use force and any different number of environments. So that is very much concerning to me, because you rely upon people who went to law school, people who wear the uniform, who are advising their commanders on the constitutional protections, and they're the experts, they're the subject matter experts on this issue. And so the military JAG attorney has a authority and a special expertise to provide that legal advice. And so any kind of end run around that strikes me as disturbing and as a cause of concern.
I'll ask this question as a Canadian journalist. So we're looking across the 49th the parallel across the border into what's going on down there, and a lot of the what's disturbing to Canadians is the language. Going from this, to a warrior culture. Some of his other language, from Department of Defense to Department of War. I mean, the president has already mused about invading Canada and making us the 51st state. We get a little nervous about these changes. Should we, or maybe not?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, let me just sort of agree with you up front that I think that some of this more bellicose warrior language is a cause for concern, and shifting something like the Department of Defense to the Department of War, I think is sending a signaling function to the rest of the world that I think is troubling, right? And oh, by the way, Congress can only change that name, not the president. So there's a little bit of, who has the authority to do that. But we're not just seeing just words; we're also seeing actions, right? The strike on the Venezuelan drug vessels historically had been a law enforcement matter, not a military operation that results in 17 people dying. What we're seeing with the use of the military in domestic cities, the president yesterday said the military cities could be a training ground for the military. That's just not how the military approaches its mission. And these are American free cities, right? They're not training grounds. They are welcoming, open, free societal cities. And so that sort of language and that sort of is a source of concern. And I think that the Canadians should have some degree of concern. Look, Canada's a beautiful country. They're a key NATO partner. It's an incredible ally, incredible trading partner, and so that's just not going to change regardless of who's in power. But I think that some of this language is a cause of concern.
From your point of view, what should we make of all of this? This tweaking around the edges, maybe a little more extreme than we used to. I mean, I gather that when a new administration comes in, there are all sorts of changes that take place, liberal versus conservative or whatever. But this seems to be different. Is that a fair take?
It is different. I think part of it is the secretary mentioned personnel as policy, and so who the people he's putting in charge, people in power, seem to have a loyalty to the president, to him personally, versus loyalty to maybe the Constitution itself, right? And so, the first administration, we had, Secretary Mattis, who was the Secretary of Defense, a retired four-star Marine general. Now we have Secretary Hegseth, who just has a different gravitas, different experience, and just seems much more political than Secretary Mattis at the time. So I think that the people that are in key positions of power, I think, are driving a lot of this concerning language.
What does it look like from inside the military? Like if you're one of the generals or admirals and you're, getting the message, how does that conflict with the oath that you took to the Constitution? Does it conflict with the culture that you've had for most of your career? I mean, how concerning is it to the top brass?
Well, I think the military, U.S. military, I think is very well respected in U.S. society because it's been seen as apolitical. So there certainly are political pressures being placed on the military to do non-traditional missions. But the military serves under a variety of commander-in-chiefs. The people in that Pentagon or the Quantico meeting, they may have been commissioned under Ronald Reagan or George Bush the first, right? So they have served through a lot of Secretary of Defenses. They've seen a lot of things. They've seen a lot of presidents come and go. And so they take a long view towards all of this. And you're exactly right. When you get commissioned in the Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, you take an oath to the Constitution, not to any political party, not to a president of the United States. And so that is really a key part of the culture, a key part of the training, and I don't think that's going to go away, Markham. I think it's going to be consistent. There'll be some tension points potentially, but military members do follow lawful orders, but not manifestly unlawful orders. And so, I think the constitutional importance is will stay true for the time being.
There, media reports of the response of the generals and admirals sitting in the seats. They were, not impressed. We'll put it that way. But you raised an interesting point. If their job is to not obey unlawful orders, could we see a conflict between the Secretary of Defense and the military, or the president and the military, if they refuse?
So orders in general that flow from any sort of lawful authority, whether it be for the president, Secretary of Defense, or a senior military commander, they have a high presumption of legality, that makes sense, right? You want your soldiers, sailors, Air Force, Marines to follow orders, right? You have a chain of command to do that, but there are some provisions in there in the Uniform Code of Military Justice for manifestly unlawful orders. That's a very high threshold. So, for example, ordering someone to commit a crime, to kill someone, to steal someone, that is manifestly illegal. Do not follow that order, and the military members will not do that or should not do that under penalty of law. So, I think that it gets a little bit more challenging when how do you determine does it reach that threshold of being manifestly illegal? And that's hard to do because not everyone's a constitutional law scholar, right? And so that's why the role of the JAGs are really important to sort of provide that advice up front before those orders are promulgated.
Any final observations? Anything we should have talked about that we didn't, Mark?
So I just take the long view. I take comfort in the fact that the military members they take their job very seriously. I took my job very seriously when I served the U.S. Navy for 20 years. I think that the military has a deep culture of being apolitical that obviously is under stress right now. But I think we saw the sort of the stoicism in that room from just a deep commitment to, yes, they'll be there. Yes, they hear the message, but they're not going to engage in some kind of political cheerleading. And that's runs deep, I think, in the military culture.
Mark, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Markham.